Hello everyone, this is CounterYolo, bringing you another video in Star Trek Online. Today I'll be talking about the Discovery Enterprise and Discovery D7. And despite the fact that, this happens to be a carrier that has command and tracked fire, there are some serious issues with these starships. So I will go ahead and be getting into that in just a moment. After I talk about some of those issues, I'll talk about the Starship Comparisons themselves, some thoughts on the traits and consoles in the TLDW at the end of this video, and I will actually conclude the very end of it with how Crypto could easily change it a little bit, or change it a little bit more, to make these ships much more appealing to a wider player base in general. Because otherwise, the only people that are going to be buying these ships are going to be people on YouTube that are reviewing the ships, people that just have an obscene amount of money, or people that are just actually looking at the traits and consoles of these ships. Honestly, I don't see a big player base actually wanting to fly these ships, like actually for intrinsically because of the stats on the ships themselves, which is pretty unfortunate, to be honest. Anyway, see the description and time links for everything in this video, and let's go ahead and get started. So to start off with the issues with these starships, they are, well, first off, they have the same stats, but also because they are a combination of two different subclasses in the cruiser category, which happen to be the two least popular cruiser subclasses in Star Trek Online: flight deck cruisers and engineering carriers. Why did you combine those two? Anyway, flight deck cruisers really only have a niche appeal to tank captains because everyone else just goes to something else so they can use dual heavy cannons. None of the flight deck cruisers in the game can use dual heavy cannons at the moment. I think that's wrong, and they should, but that might be a different video entirely as to why. The big thing for them is that they get a hangar bay for the cost of losing 2 of their 4 cruiser commands: weapon system efficiency and strategic maneuvering. They still have shield frequency modulation and command and tracked fire, but they don't have these other 2 ones, which is why I typically call these defensive cruiser commands. And these 2 bottom ones down here, offensive cruiser commands, because weapon system efficiency is used for DPS captains, and if you happen to have a ship that is completely overcapping in your overall power levels for your weapons, and you don't need extra weapon power cost reduction, then strategic maneuvering is a bit better for you, so that you can move around the map even faster. Otherwise, you use weapon system efficiency instead for most of your DPS builds out there. Now, with this particular flight deck cruiser, instead of having 1 hangar bay, you get to have 2, and the layout is a 5-3, just like most of the flight deck cruisers actually inside of the game. The only one that's 4-4 is the Herald flight deck assault cruiser, and the Voth one. That's a tier 5E, the Voth Bastion. The rest of them are 5-3 to my understanding right now. Feel free to correct me in the comments. The console layout, unfortunately, is 3 tactical with 3 science and engineering with 1 extra universal. It should have been 4 tactical, 2 science, but we'll get to that later in this video. And for the bridge officer seating, there's issues because the precedent for a lot of your cruisers in the game right now that tank is to have a lieutenant commander command, and this ship only has a lieutenant command. Anyway, the Discovery D7 also has a battle cloak. Otherwise, the D7 has the exact same stats as the Discovery Enterprise. If you compare this to the Discovery engineering carriers, the Web 1 layout is very inconsistent with this particular subclass. I don't know why that's the case. I think maybe because Cryptic has no idea what they're doing with the carrier subclasses in general in this game. I guess we'll see in the future if that's the case, or if they just are trying to say that subclass no longer exists and it's going to merge with like the flight deck subclasses, which would also be weird because the flight deck classes for escorts and science vessels both can use dual heavy cannons, so engineering probably should be able to as well. Anyway, engineering carriers, the thing about real carriers inside the game, the thing that's standard for every carrier is that for both engineering, science, tactical carriers, all of them have 2 hangar bays. All of them have at least 6 weapons. Your better ones nowadays at least have 7, and they have a very low turn rate, but have decently high hull and or shields. Additionally, with those 2 hangar bays, all of them can use dual heavy cannons. Our Discovery Enterprise and Discovery D7 are the first carriers in the game, carriers being defined as a ship that has 2 hangar bays, that cannot use dual heavy cannons. I think that is flat out wrong. And especially with a lot of the promotional material out there talking about these ships that were upcoming, the theme seemed to be around the huge amount of hangar pets that you could have with these ships. So the fact that it was promoted around it being a carrier, but yet you can't have the regular carrier ability of having dual heavy cannons on this ship, seems very inconsistent with that theming overall. And then of course we get to me personally. Now I have a particular build with a particular Romulan captain that is aligned with the Klingon Empire, that for the longest time I was waiting for a tier 6 Klingon D7 that I could use with her plasma dual heavy cannon / turret build. For the longest time I was waiting for a new D7 to come out, so that had access to the Romulan Republic that I could use those cannons on. And we finally get a Discovery D7 that Romulans can actually use, and they can't use dual heavy cannons on it. Cryptic, come on. Come on, Cryptic. Why are you making things harder than they really need to be? Of course, we have the other issues, of course, that, with our theming, that these ships are very similar to, the TOS Enterprise and TOS D7. And these ships also had different stats on them and different specialist bridge officer abilities. They both had Commander Temper Operative, but this one was a Lieutenant Commander Command. This one was a Lieutenant Commander Intel. And these ships have the exact same bridge officer layout. Later on in this video, I'll get into some different options or my personal preference of how they could have easily done this, without changing things too much. Now, when it comes to other carriers in the game, you're like, well, I mean, this is the first Enterprise that has cruiser commands and 2 hangar bays, right? Nope. We have the Enterprise J, which also has 2 cruiser commands, the offensive versions of like the engine one as well as the weapon one. It's got 8 weapons. It's a 4-4 instead of 5-3, but it's got 8 weapons, and it can use dual heavy cannons. The bridge arm team is a little bit lackluster with 3 lieutenant seats, because back in that time for Star Trek Online, most ships that were coming out, the pattern was to have a commander seat, a lieutenant commander seat, and then 3 lieutenant seats. So I mean, the ship was really strong for its time, and this ship should have been a better version of it, but whatever. Anyway, with that rant over, here's the actual stats of the starships themselves. Exact same between the two. The hull and shields honestly are fine, considering that it's got a decent turn rate for a cruiser. Plus, it's got a decently fast impulse rating for everything else on this ship. It's actually pretty nice, honestly, despite the fact that it should have a Lieutenant Commander command, and it should have 4 tackle consoles. And of course, have access to dual heavy cannons. Okay, with that over, let's go ahead and get into the Starship Comparisons themselves. Let's see if I can stay positive throughout this. Of course, we'll compare us first to the flight deck cruisers, and then we'll get into more of the different types of carriers as well. In my opinion, these are the 2 best flight deck cruisers inside the game. In my opinion, most of what the stats on here is actually being borrowed directly from the Suiban Silic flight deck assault cruiser, as well as the other 2 fleets flight deck assault cruisers available inside the game, but mainly it's this one, to be honest. And why they didn't just make it a Lieutenant Commander Tactical Command, I have no idea. Why they didn't just switch over the consoles from here over to here and then add the Universal Console on top of it, I don't know either. Maybe they're thinking that having that extra hangar bay was totally fine with all this, and you wanted to ignore the cruiser stuff on top of it. Now, keep in mind, having a Commander Engineering Miracle Worker with a Lieutenant Universal Command is totally fine, and it's definitely doable. I mean, even if you don't use dual heavy cannons, you could definitely do this for a torpedo build, for instance. But why do that when you can still get a different ship from Promotion Pack that has a Commander Miracle Worker with a higher seated Lieutenant Commander command? I mean, sure, the downside with this ship versus the Enterprise is you're losing one rear weapon slot. But you can do torpedo builds much easier on this thing, and you also have access to dual heavy cannons. So plus more tactical consoles as well. Plus you could do 5 science consoles with this as well. I mean, to be flat honest with you, this thing's better for torpedoes, and this is just a flat out cheaper and pretty similar thing to what the Discovery Enterprise would be able to give you as well. But it's from the fleet. The only downside is you're down one console, and you can't use some of the fancy Commander Miracle Worker abilities with this ship. Yeah, in my opinion, Cryptic really missed the ball with this. When it comes to engineering carriers, I mean, we have the Enterprise J as well as its Klingon and Romulan variants, which are very similar in its stats. As I said before, it has 3 lieutenancies, which is a bit unfortunate. But it still has access, but you can still do a Lieutenant Commander Universal command here that you can make into a tactical, which can make this a totally fine ship. You get the offensive command instead of defensive. You still get 8 weapon slots, 2 hangar bays, and you can still use dual heavy cannons with this. Plus, you also have a have a lance on this ship as well alongside all this, so you can do even more damage as well if you can deal with the turn rate and impulse and inertia issues that this ship has. As for the Herc carrier that was released last summer, that was part of the issues with some of the what's it called? Basically, Cryptic significantly nerfed some of the traits and consoles that dealt with buffing hangar pets, and with their Discovery Enterprise in D7, they decided to release some interesting hangar pets, which might potentially change how the meta is going to be going forward. Feel free to see the STR Reddit if you're curious as to whether you should be using a ship with 2 hangar bays or not in the future. As for science carriers, these are the best ones in the game. The General Vanguard carrier from the Sea Store or the Fleet carrier for Federation captains. Downside with these ships, obviously, is that with all the other carriers in this game, none of them have access to a secondary deflector. So, and that's a good source of a lot of science damage in the game right now, so it is a big downside. I think that was honestly an oversight on Cryptic's part, frankly, because most of your other science ships got a secondary deflector, and carriers for some reason did, when they really should have. Alright, that said, let's go ahead and continue on to our next part, which is our KDF carriers, of course, because we can't forget about the KDF, right? Right? Alright, so we don't have any real science carriers in the game at tier 6 for KDF. The engineering carrier is just the Enterprise J, but the KDF version of that one from Promo Pack. And the tactical carrier for KDF is the Sarcophagus Dreadnought carrier, which has an abysmal turn rate and impulse and inertia. Its Bridge Opportunity is quite a bit worse than our Discovery D7 as well, so kind of unfortunate there. Its hull is decently high, but you have all that and you're lower. I don't know if this is a cloak or a battle cloak. It's been a while since I've flown this ship. And yes, I've flown this ship because before we got history, remember, I did buy a few Sarcophagus Dreadnought carriers to get the Honor Dead trait for a couple of my KDF characters. I freaking hated flying this ship, but the trait was good for its time. History Remember is a bit better now, but I mean, obviously as a tank, you ideally want both, but for KDF, it's just too cost prohibitive to get Honor Dead, especially with the trait on the Federation Connie for Discovery, which we'll talk about later on in this video. Now, Going away from the carriers, we'll go ahead and just do the regular comparisons versus the other standard enterprises and D7s inside the game. So of course we'll compare this to the TOS Enterprise and the Star Trek Online's Enterprise. Look at this. Both of these cruisers have a Lieutenant Commander Universal Command. Shining a light again that this ship probably should have a Lieutenant Commander command seat. Just throwing it out there. Also, the TOS Enterprise has 3 tactical consoles. I mean, the variants of the Enterprise F for Star Trek Online has anywhere from 2 to 4 tactical consoles. I think it should have 4 as well, a 4 standard plus 1. Just saying here. Now, when we compare this to the ones from the fleet, the Enterprise E also has a Lieutenant Commander command seat potentially, or you could choose the Intel version and get a Lieutenant Commander Universal Intel as well. The Enterprise C has a Commander Temporal Operative seat. Its seating is kind of it struggles honestly with its seating, especially if you're gonna it is hard to use this ship properly. Definitely you definitely can make this ship work, but it's just a struggle. And then of course there's a lot of people who just clearly don't like the Enterprise B either. There's also the Enterprise D and the Galaxy X, but I don't feel like those were completely fair comparisons to this ship either. You can feel free to debate that in the comments though. Now for the Klingon D7s, we'll first compare them to the TOS ones. In my opinion, the Klingon D7 should have been based off of the D9 Dreadnought battlecruiser. The STO wiki is incorrect on the cruiser commands on this ship. This ship does not have command attract fire. It doesn't. It is inaccurate on that. I can't remember if it has offensive cruiser commands or battlecruiser commands. Basically, I can't remember if this ship has weapon or shield frequency remodulation or not, but it definitely has the other 2 typical offensive cruiser commands for most of your cruisers inside the game. Anyway, the D7 Temporal Battlecruiser is obviously the TOS D7. It has a commander seat with 3 lieutenants, and it's instead of having a command seat, it has an intel seat, which would be one of the options that I list at the end of this video for what the Discovery Klingon D7 could have been. Because as I said before, because this combo of 2 starships is very similar to the TOS starships that were released a few years ago, in my opinion, this ship should have been fundamentally different. Stats should have been a little bit different, and the console layout as well as the projection should have been different too. When you compare it to the ships available from the fleet, there aren't really any good ones. I mean, there's the Tier 5 Yucatinga if you really want that one, but its bridge officer seating is extremely lacking in the tactical department. Plus, it only has 3 tactical consoles, so it really sucks. Instead of that one, I'd go with either the Fleet Moog if you want something that looks kind of similar, or the Fleet Overall. Bridge officer seating is a little bit better from a tactical standpoint. I mean, still from all these things, you're probably going to want the Lieutenant Commander Universal to be an engineering seat, just so you can do aux to emergency battery a little bit easier on this ship, because you don't have enough science consoles to do really sciencey stuff on this ship, frankly. All right, so with that all said, here's some thoughts on the traits and consoles and such with these 2 promotion pack starships. The Discovery Enterprise has a starship called Polarized Latest Optimized Titanium Armor. You get some additional damage of resistance and healing after taking what it says extreme damage. I'm not sure what that means. Hopefully it is pre-mitigated damage instead of actual damage. Basically, the way that I see this trait is that I'm assuming that you can get the traits from these ships off the exchange for the opposite faction that can't get the starship. This looks like a cheap survival trait that is the equivalent of Honored Dead for KDF captains, essentially. So that Federation have Honored Dead as a cheap survival trait, and now Klingon captains will have the Polarized latest optimized titanium armor for a Starship trait for easy, cheapish survival. The console from the Enterprise is Reinforced Squadrons. Passive stats are basically garbage, but the clicky sounds like it's just going to be an extra call to have your current fighters attack a target extremely more importantly, honestly. Plus, it launches extra fighters for the duration, then they come back and heal and stuff. Maybe it's good. Maybe the clicky's good. The stats are garbage, but the clicky might be good, depending upon if you're going to be a carrier. If you're like building your ship completely around carriers, this might be a staple console to use. For the Discovery D7, the Starship trait is called the Ruin of Our Enemies. As you defeat enemies that aren't torpedoes nor shuttles, you start to get bonus damage for a short amount of time. I didn't really specify how long that was. And for every 5 enemies that you defeat, you get some cooldown reductions to your bridge officer abilities. So, especially for DPS captains that are destroying stuff really quickly, especially on maps where you have a lot of things that aren't pets going around and having to destroy them, this sounds like it's going to be a cheap, decent cooldown trait for a lot of bridge officer abilities for Federation captains. The console render visible is kind of like the Reinforced Squadrons, except instead of summoning a lot of extra fighters, you summon a cleave ship to ram the target and attack for a little bit. When it comes to the hangars, or for your pets themselves with this, typical hangars use 6 fighters or 2 frigates in total. Well, for ships with 2 hangars will be able to hold, yeah, those types of things. So the special thing about these ones is that in each of the fighter spots, each one of those 6 fighter spots, it's actually going to be a squadron of fighters instead of an individual fighter, which means for each one of those hangars, you're actually going to get, well, 36 times 2 fighters instead of the regular 6 fighters. So that's actually what 36 times 2 is 72. So 72 fighters right off the bat with just the hangar base themselves. Yeah, that's how that works. So it's a lot of fighters right off the bat. Plus, if you use Reinforced Squadrons, plus maybe some other things that launch other fighters, you could definitely get up to like the 96-ish like fighters that Ambassador Kale was saying that you might be able to get to later with different things for your ship. Oh man, there's going to be so much lag in the game. Oh, there's going to be so much lag. 5 people each with 100 fighters. Oh, that's going to be really terrible. Anyway, additionally with this, they have the advanced phaser or advanced disruptor beam arrays that have a unique visual similar to what was seen in the finale of Discovery Season 2, with apparently a proc that increases the damage of the beam arrays. And apparently the buff scales more with more weapons on your starship. I don't know if this is a passive proc or if it's a real proc that has to proc in order for it to increase your damage. I guess we'll see in a couple of days, frankly. As for the TLDW for this video, for the Discovery Enterprise and Discovery D7, or as what the game's going to call them, the Miracle Worker Flight Deck Cruisers, or the D7 Miracle Worker Flight Deck Cruiser, they're technically the strongest. They're basically just a stronger Miracle Worker 2 hangar version of the Fleet Flight Deck Assault Cruisers. Just like with the rest of that class, you don't get access to dual heavy cannons on these, and so even though some of the bridge opportunity looks okay, could be better. The problem is you don't get to use dual heavy cannons, so the DPS crowd's not even going to worry about these starships. They might buy them for the traits or the pets, but they aren't but they are not going to buy this to actually fly it, frankly. As for the starship traits, because they're different for each starship, it means that for the opposite faction, they can't fly the Starship, they can actually get the other Starship shape probably relatively cheaply on the exchange. I'm not sure if that'll be initially or over time, but they should be able to get them eventually. The Discovery Enterprises trait is basically the cheap version of Honored Dead for KDF now, which is actually pretty cool. And Discovery D7 has another cooldown reduction trait for Federation captains on defeating enemies. I've done the math wrong for fighters. Feel free to get mad at me in the comments. It should be 36 per hangar base, so 72 in total instead of what I thought was initially when I was making this, of 18 each for 36. I did the math wrong. Let's move on. The consoles are just summon ships. The Enterprises one summons fighters. The D7 one summons a Cleaves battlecruiser. The fight with you for a little bit. Now, are these things worth it? If you are a beam fire will tank player that aren't worried about the cost of a starship inside the game, you're probably going to find some value in the Starship. Torpedo builds are also viable on this ship, although the promo Zenkethi carrier is honestly better for the price. The hangar pets, I think, are the general appeal for these starships, though. Frankly, wait for reviews on STO Reddit. And as I said, it should have been an engineering carrier, not a flight deck cruiser, so that it could have used dual heavy cannons. And look, let's just be honest here. If the hangar pets are an extreme success, Cryptic will release more hangar pets like these here. Except they'll probably be released on cheaper starships, which means hangar pets like these ones in the future could very easily be much cheaper to obtain than just from a promotion pack starship. Just going to throw that out there. This is definitely something that they're experimenting with and that they might be implementing on much cheaper starships in the future. Okay? Okay. Now, how could they have fixed these starships to make them better? Well, first off, if you just said that they were carriers instead of flight deck cruisers, that would have been much better. So what I'm saying here for the bridge option seating, it should have been a Lieutenant Commander Tactical Command instead of Lieutenant Universal Command. Just my personal thing. Make it much better and actually be able to compete more with these Zenkethi carrier. Additionally, it should have been a 5 Engineering 2 Science 4 Tactical instead of 5 Engineering 3 Science 3 Tactical. And additionally, it should be able to have dual heavy cannons because, hey, you know what? If we're combining the best of both worlds or two different subclasses, we should be able to get the best of multiple subclasses. Not that we're restricting one from the other. That's just me. Additionally, not needed. It would be nice if instead of shield first modulation that it has weapon system efficiency instead, like a typical Dreadnought cruiser would. That would make this a bit more competitive, and frankly would get more people to buy these starships and actually fly them. Now, my personal preference, as just one little thing to change as well, the TOS Enterprise and TOS D7, as well as the TOS Tless Warbird. What's special about those ships was that you had a Commander Engineering with 3 Lieutenant Commander seats. In my opinion, these ships should have been in the same way, with a Commander seat and 3 Lieutenant Commanders as well. The TOS, or the Discovery Enterprise, should have been Tactical Command with Commander Engineering Miracle Worker, and then you have 2 more seats there that you can choose for anything else, without a forced Lieutenant Commander Science. This would allow it so that if you don't want Science abilities, if you want just another Lieutenant Commander Engineering and Lieutenant Commander Tactical, you can easily do that. And if you only want like 3 or 4 tactical abilities, you can make your entire Lieutenant Commander Tactical seat command abilities, if you really want to. Very, very easy to do that. Very, very flexible. Additionally, beyond that change and making the D7 version Intel instead of Command to make it symmetrically in line with the TOS D7, what it should also have been instead of is to also change it so that it has 1 Science and 5 Tactical instead of 2 science, 4 tactical. Realistically, and I'm just going to say this right now. Right now, there's basically zero incentive to play Klingon right now from an objective numbers standpoint to play the playoff faction at all. Now, from a PvP standpoint, there is some nuanced situations because of battle cloaks and enhanced battle cloaks like the Burrell Bird of Prey from the fleet. That one's an insanely good PvP starship. The TOSD-7 was also a pretty good one in PvP as well because of some other weird situations. Frankly, if they basically made it so that the Klingon 1 did more damage and actually could potentially compete with the Vodwar Miracle Worker Juggernaut, difference being that instead of a Juggernaut array, it had some cruiser commands for them to use +2 hangar bays, I think that would be really cool. The way that it stands right now, though, Cryptic has basically decided at this point that they want to do less effort into making their starships. They want to make the Federation and Klingon ones basically the exact same starship, which I think is wrong. Cryptic should be actively promoting their Klingon side of things, and frankly, just making the Klingon stuff stronger. Not just from a kind of stronger than like, oh, we'll just add a battle cloak. No, make them stronger. Make them objectively better from a DPS standpoint. But anyway, that's about it for my ranting for this video. Hopefully some of this was informative and interesting for y'all to hear today. I really am not a fan of promotion pack starships at all, nor exchange starships in general, whether it's from the low-buy store, lockbox store, nor promotion packs. I think they all should be able to be purchasable from the C-store, or at least at minimum be able to have some C-store method to unlock all the starships that you would get from the exchange, so that the accounts player thing could become more of a thing in Star Trek Online. Alright, that's it all for me for today. Thank you all for watching, and enjoy the rest of your day.